Well, thank you and welcome to this session on Pathway to Employment. My name is Andrew Eddy from Untapped and I'm joined by Beth Radulski from La Trobe University, and also he runs a business called Advocate Neurodiversity. And we're here today to talk to you about our approach to creating a sustainable neurodiverse employment ecosystem. And this is a part of our strategic vision to create this ecosystem. And if we go to the next slide, the opportunity we are looking to do is to work with companies to create this ecosystem. We're looking for companies who already understand the opportunity of diversity. They've done other things in the area of diversity, and now they're looking at exploring neurodiversity as another opportunity. And it's about identifying commercially compelling opportunities for resourcing requirements, for going through a process of assessing that company, assessing the workplace, designing the jobs that are appropriate for this cohort of people we're looking for, and then going through a process of finding those individuals, assessing them through a selection process. We don't interview, assessing through a selection process to understand what they can do really well, and then bring them into the organization in a 3-year program that helps them not just get a job, but start a career. The other part of the program is to also train up the existing individuals in the workplace so that they understand how to work with autistic and neurodivergent individuals. Next slide, please. So that's about creating the demand for these opportunities, but in the long term, we need to create a talent pipeline. And this is the concept of the Neurodiversity Hub that has been developed, which is a co-curricular program designed to implement at universities and colleges to create better pathways to university, support students get through their course, and to partner with employers to create work experience opportunities so that they have a better chance of getting a job at the end of their course. The other part of this pipeline is the Genius Armory initiative, which you can see there on the screen. And this is about the idea of helping individuals, autistic individuals, understand what the opportunity could be of cybersecurity as a career. So we've created this set of fundamentals training in cybersecurity, which can help someone in the space of 6 to 10 hours understand if this is an area of interest for them, and to complete a set of materials and show us what they can actually do. So that's another way in which we identify people. Next slide, please. So having got that in place, we're then encouraging students to enroll or get involved in the programs at the universities that are in the hub. We're encouraging employers to join forces with these universities, to partner with them, to create programs, create opportunities for the students, to understand more about careers, to come to those companies, to do field visits, to do job shadowing, to do internships and employment programs. We're also looking to partner with human services organisations in this area as a way of identifying other individuals who may be appropriate for these programs. Next slide, please. And ultimately, there are research opportunities right across the board here, and there's a lot more that can be done around research. So we are keen to partner with universities in the research space to understand more about how we can make these programs better. Next slide. So I'm now going to pass to Beth, who's going to take us through what she has been doing at La Trobe University, which is a university here in Melbourne, which is one of the initial universities to join the Neurodiversity Hub. She's going to be talking to us about the approach she's taken to implement this program at the La Trobe University. Over to you, Beth.
Thank you so much, Andrew. So what we're going to be speaking about today, I think it's so wonderful that Andrew signed off by speaking about partnering with universities and developing better understandings of how neurodiversity can be supported in that context, because that's exactly what we're trying to do at La Trobe through our partnership with Neurodiversity Hub. So just to get us started, I thought I would just introduce myself a little bit as a researcher and also as an autistic person and professional working in the neurodiversity space. So I'm currently completing a PhD on neurodiversity, and as a sociologist, I'm perhaps an unlikely candidate in the field of autism research, but I think sociology is quite important because I think it can teach us all about taking a cultural approach to facilitating inclusion and equality, just like we do in other fields, like with cultural diversity and gender diversity and so forth. So on that note, what we are trying to accomplish at La Trobe through the Neurodiversity Project is really all about changing the culture versus changing the individual. We're not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole here. We're very much trying to change the university to ensure that its institutions, its culture, its practices are inclusive and accessible and can meet the demands of a neurodiverse cohort, just like it can with a culturally diverse cohort. So as somebody who went through university as an autistic student myself, I think it's really important for us to understand what autistic and otherwise neurodivergent students are up against in their undergraduate degrees. This will help us to ensure that any resources and cultural changes that we provide are actually accounting for any other factors that might be going on below the surface. So I think it's really important to note when we're trying to make changes in these areas, only about 7% of autistic people feel that they're accepted by society, and autistic people often report masking and camouflaging. So not disclosing their autism status in a way that they might be able to get disability support adjustments, not being able to be openly autistic with their lecturers and tutors and so forth. And the reason why they do this is to avoid retaliation, bullying, and discrimination, obtain jobs and qualifications in education that are less accessible if they're openly or publicly autistic. And oftentimes, autistic people choose not to disclose because they feel they're likely to be excluded by peers and colleagues if they do come out as autistic. So we want to be mindful of these things when we take our approach to neurodiversity and try to implement supports for this cohort. So what are some of the consequences of disclosure that students can face? They might worry, will my reputation suffer? Will I be able to have the career that I want? A postgraduate supervisor? Will my lecturer have unconscious bias that might affect my grades? If I've had bad experiences before, will they repeat here? Could I lose my visa if I'm an international student? Could I lose my job or degree if I'm working in a caring space where autistic people might be more likely to experience discrimination and stereotyping? So students need to ask themselves, does the benefit of disclosure outweigh the risks? And as a university, it is our cultural responsibility to ensure that the benefits of disclosure do outweigh any risks that may be there. So at La Trobe, we try to accomplish this cultural shift in a number of ways. It's a very multifaceted program. And what I'm going to do is, rather than speak to each of these different bubbles on this slide, I'm going to break them down one at a time and give you some concrete examples of things that we're doing and maybe some practices that your own university or organization could implement as well. So first and foremost here is the concept of inclusion and representation. We think it's very important, and certainly the ethos in the autism research field is moving towards autistic representation as a default. We're ensuring that research is co-designed with autistic people, and that any projects and outputs and community-facing initiatives are things that autistic people themselves want. So in this case, the Neurodiversity Project is led by an autistic person who is an autism researcher, who has an understanding of the community and the barriers to inclusion. This also helps to set a precedent for other staff and students. It makes the type of environment where you can see this person's come out, they've been successful, maybe I could come out too. So this is actually the event that Andrew and I first met at the university when I was introduced as the first openly autistic PhD candidate, and I'm so thrilled to say have many, many more openly autistic researchers at the Olga Tennyson Autism Research Center now, which is just wonderful to see. So the next topic that I'd like to discuss is cultural sensitivity and changing the narrative. So one of the things that can be a barrier for inclusion is the way that we talk about neurodiversity and think about neurodiversity. And if we take a very medicalized deficits-based model, it's going to be difficult for neurominority groups like autism, ADHD, dyslexia to feel comfortable disclosing because they're going to feel like they might be pathologized. So rather, we want to change the narrative and celebrate the strengths of neurodiversity, again, like we would with cultural diversity. So we do this in a number of ways. This is an example of a cultural sensitivity toolkit that we've developed, which you can find on La Trobe's website. And it really just focuses on ensuring that staff and students know how to engage in a culturally sensitive way with neurominority groups. Another facet that's key to our mission is working with our Disability Services Department at La Trobe. It's called Accessibility Hub. And I think it's great that it's called Accessibility Hub because it's really a way of signaling to both staff and students what our mission is really all about. In that it's what it sounds like. You're accessing your ability. So we're making sure that our culture and our institution is accessible, even for disabled students who would oftentimes be excluded on the basis that an institution isn't necessarily going to be accessible for them. So we try really hard to ensure that we work closely with this department to facilitate the aims of the Neurodiversity Project. So this can be everything from tailored support systems to policy review. We just began a new internship where we have a law school student working with us to review our policy through a neurodiversity framework and recommend changes that will ensure that our policies are more inclusive, both in terms of the way they're worded, in terms of the way they're communicated to students, but also in affording the best possible protections and rights to our students on campus. This also, in the Australian context, takes place through higher education law for disability. So it's really important that the institution is mindful of its legal obligations to support disabled students and that we understand how to apply that in the context of neurodiversity as well. So next we have teaching and learning. So one of the areas we're really passionate about is working directly with academics to ensure that when they go into a classroom, their understanding of neurodiversity is fundamentally different than it perhaps would have been without the Neurodiversity Project. So traditionally, we tend to assume that if we have a disabled or neurodivergent student in our classroom, they will come to the lecturer, they will disclose their disability, and they will ask for reasonable adjustments. This, of course, puts a lot of pressure on a student who might feel a bit awkward asking for the teacher to change things to accommodate to one person. So we encourage teaching staff to instead assume that their classroom is neurodiverse, the same way their classroom is culturally diverse, and tailor their teaching practices to assume that there are a diverse range of learners in their classrooms. So we deliver ally and accessibility training. We focus on a strengths-based approach so that lecturers aren't going to be bogged down thinking about accounting for deficits. Rather, we want to empower lecturers and other teachers on campus to work with students to access their strengths and get the most out of their studies based on, again, a strengths-based approach. So another example of this is, again, rather than asking the student to take the onus for, as I suppose, assimilating to the cultural norm or the standard and fitting the square peg into the round hole, we're changing the culture. So how can we ensure that our lecturers understand autistic body language rather than expecting autistic people to adapt to neurotypical behavioral norms? Campus and accessibility is also a really key component of what we are doing. So again, one example of this is we've created accessible event checklists for several different types of events. So if a lecturer knows I need to cater to a neurodiverse classroom, there's a handy checklist that they can go through to find out some key ways that they can improve accessibility in a classroom or in a lecture theater. We do the same for orientation events, campus tours, and large events that might be organized on campus, which I think is really important. And gives people a good place to start, because this can feel so overwhelming, and it's really, I think, beneficial to have a clear and structured way to go about things, and also an example of how easy some of these changes are. They don't have to be big, sweeping, expensive changes. It can be as simple as using a different font on your slides to make sure they're more dyslexia friendly. I think it's really important we empower people to make those little changes. Finally, the note that I'd like to end on is changing the culture again to one of acceptance and celebration. So this is one of my favorite outputs from the Neurodiversity Project so far. This is our very first openly autistic academic and lecturer. His name is Dr. Benjamin Habib. He actually began questioning if he might be autistic in an ally and accessibility training workshop I delivered to the lecturers in his politics department. Eventually sought a diagnosis, publicly came out, and now speaks about being autistic and how beneficial it is in his career as an academic. So I'm so thrilled to see these types of things happening now. We're approaching the 2-year mark in the project, and you can really see and feel the culture changing all around you, which is just absolutely wonderful. So on that note, I'll probably just hand back to Andrew to wrap up with any final thoughts, but I would very much encourage you to visit neurodiversityhub.com if you felt enthusiastic about this presentation, because several of the resources we've talked about are available on Neurodiversity Hub, and you can find anything from resources on disclosure to transitioning into university. There are resources for students, for universities, for parents. And many of them are actually co-designed and co-authored with neurodivergent people themselves. So I'll hand over back to Andrew on that note.
Thank you, Beth. That's fantastic. And I just want to acknowledge all the great work you're doing. The model that La Trobe's using for this, where they're engaging an autistic individual directly in the process, is, well, it's an exemplary approach, and encourage other universities to look at doing that. It just makes such a difference and adds so much credibility to the process. Just to echo some of the things that Beth said about the Neurodiversity Hub, it has got heaps of resources, as well as the items that Beth mentioned. There's also stuff there on mental health, on COVID, working from home, studying from home. There's stuff there on the built environment. There's a whole community practice around architecture and so on. So encourage you to look at that. There's stuff for school kids. There's stuff for primary school teachers. There's a whole range of things. So please spend some time just having a look and seeing what's on there. And there's also a Facebook page, Neurodiverse Hub, which has heaps of articles each month from around the world on these great topics around neurodiverse employment and going to university. So thank you.